Good morning. Our project is Smart Attendance. We are Team 44 and my name is Tera Term 37-MET. The flow of our project is that the TA scans his ID to start a session. Students do the same thing to enter a session as rooms are closed until the ID is scanned. If a student arrives before the TA comes, his attendance will be calculated from the moment the TA starts the session. If the students arrived after the TA or after the session has started, his attendance will be calculated starting from the moment of his arrival. The session then completes normally until the TA ends it. If the student attended 75% of the session, his attendance will be taken. Otherwise, his attendance will be ignored. In case of fire, the doors open automatically, allowing the students to leave the room.
Hello, my name is Rana Azzat, and I am a 37- student. And today I will be explaining the software part of the student 1 and student 2, and the attendance of the students.
For student 1, we first start with the variables, which is student 1 scanned. Student 1 scanned basically indicates if the student has scanned his ID before or not. Is a student 1 enter basically tells us if the student is in the room or outside the room. Student 1 start time tells us if it indicates the start time of the student. Student 1 end time indicates the end time of the student, and student 1 is early indicates that the student has either arrived before the TA or after the TA. The same goes for student 2. So we actually know that this ID belongs to student 1 in our NFC reader. So the first thing we do is we basically empty the ID so that for the next time when we scan the ID, we will have an empty string, so the new ID would be in it. So the first thing we check is if the student is entering, which basically means that the student is scanning for the first time. We set student 1 scan to 1 and student 1 entered to 1 to indicate that the student has entered the room. And then if the TA has already entered before the student, the student 1 start time is the current time because the TA has already started the session, so the student will take the current time. So in this part, we're actually just opening the door and closing the door by setting the yellow light to high for 2 seconds, and then we set it back to red, to the red LED being high. And then in the else part, it means that the student has entered the class before the TA. So we set student 1 is early to 1 so that the current time would be handled in the TA part, and the TA will be giving the student the same starting time as the TA. And we open the door and close it. So if the student is actually leaving, which means that the scan time, that the student 1 scanned is equal to 1 and not 0, we basically do the same thing again with the ID. We empty it, and then we're going to reset all the variables of student 1, such as student 1 enter and student 1 scanned, and student 1 is early. And then we check if the TA was actually in the room, then the student is actually leaving before the TA, so the student will be taking the current time. However, if the TA has already left the room, then the student will be given the same end time as the TA. And we open the door and close it once again. The same goes for student 2. It's exactly the same.
Hi, my name is Marwa Gasser, 37-MET, and I'm explaining the part of the TA where attendance will be calculated.
Now what we do here is that we scan the ID. If the ID has been scanned successfully, then we check if this ID is the TA's ID. If it's the TA's ID, we check if it's the first time that the TA scans this ID. If this is true, the session starts, and this start session timing is set to millis, which is the actual timing right now, and the TA is enter flag is set to 1. Also, the TA scanned is incremented by 1 so that when the TA scans the next time, it's not equal to 0, and we know that the TA is not entering but else is leaving the classroom. Here, we indicate through LED lights that we have opened and closed the door. Now if the TA scanned is not equal to 0, which means that the TA has left the classroom, we end the session through the min-lease method, which takes the current timing value of the time and sets it to the end session. Now we open and close the door again through LED lights to indicate that the TA has left the room. Now what we do through the LCD is display the number of students available inside the classroom. Here what we basically do first is print smart attendance on the LCD, and then through a loop method what we do is that we add that if student 1 is inside the classroom and student 2 is inside the classroom, each value is set to 1, therefore it will display 2. If student 1 is not inside the classroom, for example, then this will be 0 and this will be 1, and the value that will be printed is 1. If both of them are not in the classroom, so both of the values are zeros, then Cx is equal to 0 and the value that will be printed is 0. Finally, in the project, we were asked to take the log that was displayed in the serial monitor, which records the attendance or prints the attendance of each student, to save it through a log file. So what we did is we used a software called Tera Term, which is an external app that saves the file, the stuff logged on the serial monitor into a file on the desktop or wherever you choose to save it.
Hi, I'm Rashma 37 LET. I'm going to test part of the project. So maybe this is the card of the TA. I will test on the NFC reader. So here in the LED, the student, the TA has entered, and then the student. It gives us on the LCD count 1. So one student is in here. And then the other student will enter the class. So the LED is red, is blue. And then one of the students will go out. So it will decrement by 1. And then the other student. And then when the TA go out, the LED will start to be yellow for 10 seconds, so every student will go out from the class.
اعملي بازر.
أعمل بازر. We use in our project Arduino Uno. And our hardware consists of an NFC that reads the IDs of the students and the TA. We have an LCD that displays the count of students attending the session. We also have a smoke sensor that detects smoke in case of fire. And this buzzer makes a sound or an alarm if there's a fire. Okay? We also have two LEDs, a red one and a yellow one. The red one lights detecting that the door is closed, and the yellow one detects that the door is open.
Hello, I'm Sra Atif. I'm a 37- engineering student. I'm gonna explain to you about the hardware of our project. First thing, we have the buzzer. Its negative wire is connected to the ground. Its positive wire is connected to one of the legs of the resistor. The other wire is connected to pin number A2. It's an analog pin. Now, the LEDs are connected the same, except that they are connected to pins A0 and A1. Those pins, first we had a problem because we were using Arduino Uno. We needed more pins to use, so we changed from analog pins to digital pins. We did that for the two LEDs and the NFC and the smoke sensor, as well as to the LCD. Second thing I'm going to explain would be the NFC. The first wire is connected to the 5 volts. The second wire is connected to the ground. Now the next 4 wires are connected to pin number 10, 7, and 13 and 8 in the Arduino. Finally, we have the LCD. In the LCD, we faced few problems. The first thing, we didn't have a potentiometer, which is responsible for how bright the screen is. So we connected the pins that are responsible for that to 3.3 volts, and that's pin A. We also connected 4 other pins to the ground. It's the first pin, which is K. It's pin number 16.